I'm Humanist. I like you.
My name is Gary McLelland. I grew up in a town called East Kilbride, which is a small town just outside Glasgow, which is in Scotland in the UK. And I now live in London, where I work as the Chief Executive of the International Humanist and Ethical Union. So the story of how I became an atheist starts with my childhood. I was raised on the west coast of Scotland. I was brought up in a Catholic family. I went to a Catholic school, and my family has a lot of connections with Ireland. My grandfather was Irish, so we were raised in a fairly traditional Irish Catholic tradition, and I went to Catholic school. And I have to say that my experience with religion was very positive in my childhood. I enjoyed going to church. I had very positive interactions with religion in school and so on, so it was really a fairly happy time. It wasn't until my teenage years when I started to have doubts, and I remember that I met a friend of mine at a party, and this friend of mine, I knew he was smarter than me, he had read more books than me, and he was just a very intellectual guy. And I always remember that he said to me at this party that he wasn't religious, and he seemed to be surprised that I was religious. And this is something that went into my brain, and it stayed there for several months. And I tried to understand how it could be that somebody smarter than me and more well-read could come to a different conclusion about something so important and so something that affected every part of my life. And I started to wonder if maybe it could be the case that I was wrong about the assumptions I had made. And this is not something that I really wanted to question. I didn't really want to lose my religion. I didn't want to have that big issue to try and deal with. But what I did to try and resolve this conundrum in my head was what would turn out to be basically a scientific experiment. So I started to try and live my life as if God didn't exist. I was pretending that there was no God. And so, for example, I stopped going to church, I stopped wearing my crucifix, I stopped saying my prayers, and gradually over time I tried to remove religion from my life to see what the impact would be. And the result was very strange. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. My life continued on, the same struggles and the same happiness, and everything was completely unchanged. And this led me to the conclusion that at least the assumptions I made about God and religion weren't true, and inevitably to the conclusion that religion was false and that God didn't exist. And I have to say that I didn't immediately embrace that as a happy sense, because there wasn't really any other way for me to think about the world. I had been raised from a child to only really have one way of viewing the world, through the lens of being a Catholic. And so when I grew up and lost my religion, it was really a very confusing time. So over the course of the next year or so, I was quite depressed. I felt quite anxious about things because my entire worldview had been pulled away from me. But I started to read a bit more widely. I started to read philosophy and about the history of other religions, and of course about the similarity of many religions around the world. And of course I discovered humanism, and I thought, that's what I am. I'm one of those people. I'm a humanist. And that gave me quite a lot of comfort. I started going to local meetings in Scotland, and I got involved with the Humanist Society there, and that felt really positive. And also my experiences there, I think, is what motivated me to get involved in humanism originally. So I was really motivated by what I think is an injustice about the way that children, to this day, in many countries around the world, are only ever exposed to one belief system, which tends to be, in Europe and the West, Christianity, and in other places around the world, Hinduism or Islam or any other religion. But in so many cases it's only ever one religion, and there's no discussion about humanism, other non-religious philosophies, or even other religions. And I think this is a real shame, and if we can help people at a younger age to be more exposed to different belief systems, I think it would not only help them or help prevent them experiencing what happened to me, but it would also help them to understand each other better and hopefully try and make the world a bit more of a nicer place to get along with people. But of course, being involved in humanism now as my job is an incredible privilege. I mean, to get to do as a job something which is so important to me is such a rare treat that very few people are able to experience, that I feel very lucky. And it's also very, very humbling for me to be able to meet people from around the world, such as in India and Pakistan, where the consequences of being a humanist, you know, I think the consequences for me of having this period of anxiety and searching for meaning and stuff was quite upsetting. But I wasn't threatened with death, and I wasn't threatened with violence, and I didn't have, you know, the apparatus of government showing complete impunity towards me when I was targeted. And so to have a sense of friendship and a sense of collegiate interaction with people around the world about this is incredibly humbling, and I consider it a real privilege for my job to try and help my colleagues around the world protect each other and promote humanist ideas. And, you know, some examples of that you know, will be many of the cases that we will have heard of people who are persecuted around the world, and trying to help them stand up for themselves and keep themselves safe. And the IHEU does what it can to try and help people keep safe and to give them some protection, and highlight the fact that for many people around the world, simply admitting that you're a non-religious person, that you're a humanist, and by being true to your own inner beliefs can mean that you're targeted with death. And this is really a shameful situation to have around the world. So that's how I became to try and work with my colleagues around the world to try and make the place a better world and a more humanist world.
Thank you, Gary. You don't wear the crucifix anymore. Do you wear the happy human?
Yes, I do actually have on my bag. I have a happy human, and I sometimes wear the badge there. So I do. I happily fly the flag for humanism now instead of my crucifix.
What do you think of the Pope?
So my thoughts on the Pope and my thoughts on the Catholic Church are complicated. I have basically two sets of thoughts which are completely in contradiction with each other, like yin and yang, and I find it very difficult to reconcile them, because on one hand, the memory I have of the church is of nice people who cared for me, who genuinely wanted me to do well, who looked after me, who fed me, who made a very welcoming environment for me. I know people who are still in the church who do incredibly good things, you know, run amazing charity organisations. So on the one hand, I have this very positive, very warm memory of the church. But then on the other hand, especially through my work with humanism, I see the stark reality of Vatican politics and Vatican policies around the world. I see, for example, the fact that the Pope will continue to condemn gay people. He will continue to stand in the way of scientific and reproductive health progress. And the amount of people that die every single year needlessly because of the Vatican's restrictions on foreign aid, the amount of dark money and you know, horrible financial irregularities within the church, and that's not even to mention the sort of industrial scale paedophile scandal that the church has continued to cover up. And I mentioned earlier I have family in Ireland. You know, if you spend some time on Wikipedia looking at the damage that the Catholic Church has done to every single bit of Irish society, it's difficult to feel anything but complete disgust for that organisation. And so in that way I'm left with these two thoughts of the church. But it's obviously my job in the IHEU to combat the Vatican policies and to push against them. But it remains, for at least the next few generations, the case that the Vatican and the Church will continue to have some influence. And so from a pragmatic point of view, if we can influence that in a positive way, that's good. But yeah, so I have mixed feelings about the Pope and the Church. But I guess it's, on the one hand, it's good that there are some liberal reformers within the Church, although I don't count the Pope as one himself. But on the other hand, it's clearly an institution which I think you should be ashamed to be involved in, but that's a complicated question.